Archaeonauts, away!
This is what the sovereign Lord says. I will destroy the idols and put an end to the images in Memphis. No longer will there be a prince in Egypt, and I will spread fear throughout the land. I will lay waste to Upper Egypt and set fire to Zoan, and inflict punishment on Thebes. I will pour out my wrath on Pelusium, the stronghold of Egypt, and wipe out the hordes of Thebes. Tanis is a ruined city in northern Egypt. Its heyday was in what is called the Third Intermediate Period in Egyptian history, which is between 1069 BC and 525 BC, placing it right after the New Kingdom and before the Persian and Greek kings. It has long been associated with Zoan in the Old Testament, although some modern archaeologists say the timeline doesn't match up for them to be the same city. But I'm not sure that's the case. It's also mentioned earlier in the Old Testament, like in Psalms, where it refers to Moses performing miracles at Zoan. When you're dealing with historic events where it's hard to pinpoint exactly when something happened, it's difficult to say for sure if one event matches up with another event on the timeline. For example, the pharaoh of the time of the 10 plagues has long been associated with Ramses II because his name is mentioned, but it may be more likely his name was mentioned because his name was more familiar to the audience reading the story at the time it was written. Ramses may have been a contemporary pharaoh the audience knew, giving them an idea of where the location the story was talking about occurred at. Pi Ramses was also the name of another city in ancient Egypt, so it's possible Ramses II wasn't the pharaoh of the time of the plagues, but a later pharaoh. The pharaoh of the plagues may have been an earlier pharaoh, like Tutmos III or his son Amenhotep II. With that in mind, it's fairly well established that Tanis was around during the Third Intermediate Period and was a capital city during the 21st and 22nd dynasties. It lost its status as a capital city after that, but remained inhabited for some time afterwards. It's unclear when exactly the city came to an end, but what is clear is that at some point, it came to a catastrophic end. The city just didn't get abandoned and deteriorated and eroded over time. Its structures were not only toppled, but also broken up into pieces, and on top of that, some are burned and melted. The question is, what happened to it? It's been suggested that the toppling of the structures is from an earthquake. An earthquake is a plausible explanation for that, but what about the burning and melting damage? It takes a very intense heat to melt a stone. I've seen it suggested that Greek fire may have been used to burn the structures. The thing is, Greek fire was probably not even invented until the 7th century AD. There were other fire weapons that existed long before Greek fire that were made of substances like bitumen, sulfur, or oil, but I don't think any of these would have burned hot enough to melt stone. Greek fire's claim to fame is that it couldn't be put out by water. Greek fire by itself probably still isn't hot enough to burn granite. It's unclear how hot Greek fire could get. The recipe for it is lost to history. It's been suggested it could have burned at around 1,000 degrees Celsius, which is over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, but I think this is probably based on modern attempts to recreate a similar formula. I don't think anyone really knows for sure how hot it could have burned, and to burn granite it would need to be over 1,200 degrees Celsius, or almost 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. So Greek fire probably wasn't even hot enough to melt the stones at Tanis. But granite can melt at a lower temperature when it's wet, and since Greek fire isn't extinguished by water, it's possible Greek fire could have burned on wet structures and melted them. So although it's a stretch, there is some plausibility to the Greek fire explanation. But that brings us to questions of what is even the point here? If an earthquake brought the structures down, why would anyone want to invade the city after that? It had been a wealthy city, so if they wanted its treasures, why didn't they take all of them? Tanis is one of the Egyptian sites where 20th century archaeologists were able to dig up unlooted treasures from antiquity. Why would invaders have left it behind? Even if they did leave it behind, if the city was already in ruins when they got there, why would they even need to bother burning it? Also, by the time Greek fire was being used, history is fairly well documented. No one bothered to mention this supposed invasion of Tanis in medieval times. No one bragged of finding great loot at Tanis. If it was loot they wanted, how did they overlook so much of it? So even though an earthquake and Greek fire may be plausible explanations, I just don't know that it fits here. Whatever happened there, it looks catastrophic. A meteor airburst might be a better explanation, similar to what occurred over Russia in 1908, near the Tunguska River in Siberia. The region the event occurred in was sparsely populated, so there were no man-made structures of significance there, but the explosion did flatten around 80 million trees. Notably, there is no impact crater at the site, so the alleged meteor exploded in the atmosphere, so it was the shock wave from the explosion that flattened the trees. It's not known for sure if it was actually a meteor that exploded. That is what most people have assumed it was, for lack of a better explanation. So in my mind, this is a possible fit for what happened at Tanis. The structures could have been toppled by a shock wave from an airburst explosion, and extremely hot fires may have rained down over the area. With that in mind, is Zoan in the Old Testament the same place as Tanis? Well, I think it could be, but I don't know that it matters if it is or not. Even if these are two different places, Tanis at least serves as an example of what could have happened to Zoan. If Tanis could be toppled and burned in such a catastrophic way, so could Zoan. Tanis may not have been the capital city anymore by the time of Ezekiel's prophecy of Zoan, but it was a thriving place. The prophecy of Zoan burning was still a vision of a future event, though. Whether or not Tanis and Zoan are the same city, what happened at Tanis could have just as easily happened at Zoan if they were different cities. I think they are probably the same city, though, and whether by airburst, Greek fire, or the hand of God, the prophecy of Ezekiel was fulfilled. Those are my thoughts on that. Thanks for listening.